Hi, I'm Margaret Collins, and I never expected my life to change overnight. Just a few days ago, I was simply a caregiver, helping an old, wealthy man who had grown bitter and distant. I thought my 6 months of work would end quietly, with a sigh of relief and a paycheck in hand. But that morning, everything shifted. I remember standing in his mahogany-paneled study, the air heavy with the scent of old books and polished wood. The lawyer cleared his throat, and my stomach dropped before he even spoke. There was a folder in front of him, thick and official-looking, and the words that came next made my heart stop. He asked me for my full legal name, the kind of question that seemed normal at first, but carried a weight I couldn't understand. As I said my name, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about the way he and his assistant exchanged a glance told me this wasn't routine. Questions about my childhood, my parents, my very identity had been slowly building over the past 6 months. And now, I realized it was all leading to this moment, the moment that would change everything I thought I knew about my life. I sat there, gripping the edge of my chair, wondering if I was about to discover a secret I wasn't ready for. And as the lawyer opened the folder, I knew, deep in my bones, that my life was about to be turned upside down in ways I could never have imagined. Before all of this, my life had been quiet, almost painfully ordinary. At 62, I had lost my husband, and the savings we had slowly dwindled after his medical bills. I was exhausted, both in body and spirit, but I needed work, any work, just to keep going. When I saw the ad for a live-in caregiver in a wealthy Connecticut neighborhood, I thought it was beyond my reach, yet something inside me pushed me to apply. Walking up to the Hawthorne mansion, I felt a mixture of awe and intimidation. 5 acres of manicured gardens, stone walls, and imposing gates made it clear this was a world I had never known. The first time I stepped into Terrence Hawthorne's bedroom, I was met with sharp eyes that seemed to look right through me. He was weak and frail in body, yet his mind was alert, almost predatory, and I sensed immediately that he would not be easy to care for. The first week was a test I hadn't anticipated. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, warned me quietly that he had driven away 12 caregivers in 2 years. She told me not to take his mood personally, but I could feel the weight of her words in the way she looked at me. Yet, even with all his sharp edges, there were moments when he seemed almost human, small smiles when I adjusted his pillows or shared a story about my own life. Those brief glimpses of warmth were like fragile threads I clung to, though I couldn't tell if they were genuine or part of a deeper game. Over time, I noticed his questions became oddly personal. He asked about my childhood, my family, details that felt unnecessary for a patient and caregiver. At first, I dismissed it as loneliness, imagining he just wanted connection. But there was something persistent in his gaze, a recognition that made the air between us taut. He seemed to be testing me, measuring my reactions, and I realized that every word, every small story I shared, might have meant far more than I could comprehend. I kept thinking about why a man like him, so rich and so guarded, would take such an interest in someone like me. Was it simply curiosity, or was there something more, something hidden that I couldn't yet see? The longer I stayed, the more the puzzle pieces began to feel urgent, almost inevitable, as if I had been drawn here for reasons that had nothing to do with money or employment. Little did I know then that every question, every probing glance, and every unusual request had been part of a careful plan. Terrence Hawthorne was orchestrating a revelation that would change not just my life, but the way I understood who I was, and I had no idea that the answers I was slowly piecing together were about to shake the very foundation of my identity. As I continued caring for him, I felt the weight of months building quietly, preparing me for something I couldn't yet name, a moment when the past and present would collide in ways I had never imagined. That moment was closer than I knew. The moment the lawyer asked about my birth date and mother's name. A shiver ran through me. It wasn't that I had anything to hide, not exactly, but those were details I had carefully left off every application, every form. For years, I had built my life as Margaret Collins, wife, caregiver, daughter, never imagining anyone would dig deeper into the past I had deliberately tucked away. I couldn't stop thinking about the questions Terrence had asked over the past months, so personal, probing, almost like he was matching pieces of a puzzle only he could see. At the time, I had written it off as idle curiosity or loneliness, a dying man wanting stories. Now, I realized he might have suspected something from the very first day I walked into his mansion. As the lawyer opened the folder and pulled out old documents, my heart pounded. Birth records, hospital files, adoption papers, all evidence I had never seen before. And then came the photograph, a black and white image of a young man standing beside a 16-year-old girl. Her pregnant belly unmistakable. Her face radiating fear and hope at the same time. My breath caught. The resemblance was uncanny. The girl had my eyes, my stubborn chin, my expressions frozen in time. My mind raced. Could this really be connected to me? My adoptive parents, who had died years ago, had always told me my birth mother was someone named Sarah, who had been older and had chosen adoption for practical reasons. Yet every instinct told me this photograph was significant, and Terrence Hawthorne's investigation might have been more personal than anyone could imagine. I thought about the questions he had asked me, childhood memories, fears, moments of joy and sorrow. I had thought it was conversation, a way to pass time together. But now it felt like a test, a careful comparison to information he had collected, quietly and methodically. And he had hired private investigators 6 months ago, the same day I arrived. The coincidence, or maybe the design, was chilling. The lawyer explained that Terrence had spent decades searching for a daughter he never got to meet. My heart ached at the thought of the years he had lived with longing and regret. I tried to reason with myself. I couldn't be his daughter. My birth mother's name was Sarah, not Jennifer. I had grown up believing I knew the truth about my origins. And yet, the resemblance, the records, the careful orchestration of my arrival, how could I ignore it? Every detail of the past 6 months suddenly took on new meaning, the way he insisted I eat with him, how he wanted stories of family reunions, the books he requested me to read, tales of lost children finding their way home. I realized he had been leaving breadcrumbs, trying to prepare me for a revelation he may have feared would shock me too deeply. I sat there in that study, my hands trembling, feeling the weight of decades of secrets pressing down on me. The past I thought I understood was shifting beneath me, and I couldn't help but wonder, what if everything I believed about myself was wrong? And more importantly, what would I do if I discovered the truth? The answers were close, almost within reach, and I felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation, knowing that the next steps would change my life forever. The moment I realized I might actually be Terrence Hawthorne's daughter, the room seemed to spin. All the careful steps I had taken to live a quiet, ordinary life suddenly felt fragile, as if they could crumble with a single breath. Holding the letter he had written, I could almost hear his voice across decades, a mixture of regret, hope, and love I had never imagined he felt for me. Reading his words, I felt tears sting my eyes. He spoke of searching for a daughter he had never met, of longing that had haunted him since the day my birth mother passed away. He admitted fear that I would think he was delusional, fear that I might reject him outright. And yet, he had orchestrated my arrival into his life with care, wanting to know the woman I had become before revealing the truth. The locket he left me, small and delicate, carried a photograph of my birth mother, Jennifer Walsh, smiling with a hand on her pregnant belly, and beside her, a tiny image of me as a newborn. I held it in my hands and felt a warmth I had never known, a connection to a mother I had never met, and a father I had thought I only knew from a distant, formal sense. Every emotion, grief, wonder, disbelief tangled together in my chest. I thought back to the past 6 months, all the small moments with Terrence, the way he insisted I eat with him, not just serve him, how he listened when I shared stories of my life, of my late husband, and even small trivialities that mattered to me. It wasn't just care, it was recognition, a silent understanding that I was someone he had been searching for his whole life. And in those moments, I realized he had been leaving breadcrumbs for me, preparing me gently for the revelation he feared might overwhelm me. The photograph, the letters, the locket, they all confirmed what my heart had begun to suspect. I was not just an employee, I was his daughter. I felt disbelief, of course, as years of adopted identity clashed with this new truth. But alongside that disbelief came a strange relief, as though a missing piece of my life had finally been found. The emotional weight was enormous. There was grief for all the years lost, for the mother I never knew, for the father who had searched so long and endured so much. Yet there was also a profound gratitude, a sense of being wanted and seen in a way I had never experienced before. And beneath it all, a quiet anticipation. This revelation was not just about discovering family, it was about stepping into a new life, a new identity, and a new purpose that Terrence had carefully left for me. I understood then that life had brought me here not by accident, but by design. And the next chapter would demand courage, understanding, and love in ways I had only begun to comprehend. As I sat there, absorbing the depth of what I had just learned, I realized that nothing would ever feel ordinary again. Every past moment, every small kindness, every curious question Terrence had asked now made sense. The story of my life had been rewritten, and I was at the beginning of something I could never have imagined, yet had always been waiting for. Just when I began to process the revelation, the tension of the outside world crept in. Terrence had siblings, and they weren't the kind of people to quietly accept surprises. Victoria, his niece, and her brothers were suddenly part of my life, appearing with a sense of entitlement that made my stomach twist. They had expected everything, every property, every asset, but I had arrived as an unexpected presence, a daughter they claimed had no right to exist in their family legacy. I felt anger rise in me, sharp and disorienting. How could they dismiss decades of searching, decades of regret, simply because I had come forward? They had visited Terrence occasionally, but they had never understood him, never taken the time to know the man beyond the surface of wealth and appearances. And now, they wanted to contest everything I hadn't even asked for. claiming motives and loyalty as though it gave them ownership over his life. At first, I felt small, overwhelmed by the weight of their expectations and the looming legal complexities. Their attorney questioned the timing, the DNA, even my honesty, as though a woman discovering her father after 6 decades was automatically suspect. I felt my chest tighten, imagining a drawn-out battle that could strip away everything I had just learned about my identity and place in this family. But then I remembered Terrence's careful planning, his foresight. There were documents hidden in his study, letters that revealed every attempt Victoria had made to manipulate and control him in his final months. I realized that the man I had come to care for, the father I was just beginning to know, had protected me even after his death. Every limitation he had set, every letter he had written, was a shield I could use to navigate this storm. I spent long hours going through his papers, tracing unauthorized transfers, reading notes on his medical care, piecing together evidence of how Victoria had attempted to influence his decisions. She had underestimated him, and she had underestimated me. My anger turned to resolve. If he had spent his life protecting the possibility of our reunion, then I owed it to him and to myself to stand firm. In those moments, I understood that the battle was about more than inheritance. It was about justice, about honoring the truth Terrence had fought for silently for decades. The stakes were high, certainly millions of dollars, a mansion, and a legacy, but the deeper weight was moral to ensure that his final months, his choices, and the love he had left me were respected. As I prepared with the lawyer, I felt a shift inside myself. The woman who had arrived timidly to care for an old man had transformed. I was no longer just a caregiver. I was a daughter, standing for the truth, ready to confront a family that had ignored what truly mattered for so long. And even as doubt tried to creep in, I reminded myself that the next steps, while daunting, were guided by the careful plan Terrence had laid out. Even in the quiet moments, as I reflected on the months leading up to this confrontation, I felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't simply about money. It was about being seen, being recognized, and ensuring that love and justice could finally have their place in a story that had waited decades to unfold. And as I closed the folder of evidence and looked around Terrence's study, I felt a strange calm, knowing that while the courtroom battle would be tense, the foundation for my path forward was already firmly set. I was ready for what came next. In the days leading up to the court hearing, I found myself reflecting on everything I had experienced with Terrence over the past 6 months. Every moment, every conversation, every book read aloud, every meal shared suddenly had a new weight. I realized he hadn't just been testing me or seeking companionship. He had been learning who I was, quietly preparing for the day when the truth would have to come out. Going through his study, reviewing letters, photographs, and financial documents, I began to understand the depth of his care. He had meticulously documented everything, anticipating the possibility of relatives trying to contest his will. I felt a mix of awe and gratitude, realizing that even in death, he was guiding me, protecting me from harm, and giving me the tools to stand strong. At the same time, I felt the nervous flutter of apprehension. Facing Victoria and her brothers in court would not be easy. They had wealth, influence, and the kind of confidence that made ordinary people quake. But I reminded myself that I was no longer just a visitor in this world. I was Terrence's daughter, and I had the truth on my side. That truth was more than just DNA or papers. It was love, care, and decades of searching that he had quietly endured. I spent long hours studying every detail, mentally preparing myself for every possible argument. I revisited each memory with Terrence, each small kindness that had revealed his character, and I drew strength from it. I realized that my role in this story was bigger than I had thought. This was not only about securing an inheritance, it was about honoring a father who had spent a lifetime searching for his daughter, and about claiming the identity and life that had been patiently waiting for me. During the quiet moments, when the house felt still and the afternoon light spilled across the study, I felt a shift within myself. The timid, cautious woman who had arrived as a caregiver was giving way to someone resolute, someone capable of standing tall in the face of intimidation. I began to see myself as a daughter worthy of the legacy he had left, and a person ready to fight for justice, not just for me, but for the integrity of the family story he had tried to protect, even in the uncertainty of what the court might hold. There was clarity in my heart. Terrence had left a trail, and I would follow it with honesty and courage. I could feel the power of his trust and love guiding me, and for the first time in years, I was filled with a quiet determination. I wasn't just preparing for a legal battle, I was preparing to step fully into my identity, embracing the woman I had become and the family connection I had finally discovered. And as I looked around his study one last time before the hearing, I felt a mixture of reverence, gratitude, and anticipation. I was ready to face what was coming, carrying with me the love of a father who had been both careful and brave, and the resolve to honor him in every step I would take. The courtroom felt heavier than I expected, crowded with people who seemed to carry their own assumptions about who I was and what I deserved. Victoria and her brothers sat with expressions of entitlement, as if decades of distant visits gave them more right to the inheritance than I ever could. The media was there too, cameras flashing, eager for scandal, but I reminded myself that this was about truth and justice, not attention. As the hearing began, I reflected quietly on every step that had led me here the months caring for Terrence. The letters, the photographs, the locket. All of it built a bridge to this moment, where the truth of my identity and his careful protection of me would finally be recognized. I could feel my heart racing, yet there was a calm beneath it, a grounding force from knowing I was standing on the foundation Terrence had left. The testimony of Mrs. Chen reinforced everything I already knew. Her voice, even in my memory, conveyed loyalty to Terrence, the care he had shown me, and the threats Victoria had made. I could see the court absorbing the evidence: unauthorized financial transfers, handwritten notes, medical interference. Each piece built a picture of a family attempting to control and deceive, versus the meticulous love of a father and the truth of my existence. Even as Victoria protested, her anger sharp, I felt the fear she tried to hide. She had underestimated both Terrence and me. I remembered his courage and foresight, his devotion across decades, and it strengthened me. I could feel the room shifting, the energy moving toward fairness. The judge's attention was clear. The evidence spoke volumes. When the final decision came, confirming that I was Terrence's daughter and the rightful heir, a weight lifted from my shoulders. Not just the legal weight, but the emotional weight of years of searching, longing, and uncertainty. Justice had been served, not just in money or property, but in the recognition of a father's love and a daughter's place in his life. Leaving the courtroom, I felt a mix of relief, gratitude, and quiet pride. I was no longer just Margaret Collins, caregiver. I was the daughter Terrence had always dreamed of finding, ready to honor his legacy, and empowered to carry forward the values and love he had instilled in his final acts. After the courtroom, life felt surreal. I wandered through Terrence's mansion, absorbing every detail: the bookshelves filled with first editions, the Persian rugs, the artwork that seemed to tell stories of generations. It was no longer just a home for someone else. It was mine. A tangible connection to a father I had finally met and a past I had only just discovered. I thought about how much had changed in a single day, how months of caregiving had led me to a truth I could never have imagined. The inheritance, while significant in monetary terms, was only part of the story. The real gift was knowing who I was, understanding the love that had quietly awaited me, and seeing the careful foresight Terrence had taken to protect me. Even after he was gone, reflecting on the entire journey, I realized that life often tests patience, courage, and trust in ways we don't expect. The love of a parent can transcend absence and secrecy, shaping us even before we are aware of it. And the resilience we discover in ourselves can emerge in moments we never thought we'd face. Now, I am committed to honoring Terrence's memory in every choice I make. I want to use what he left me to help others, to bring families together, and to cherish the connections that sometimes take decades to form. And if my story reaches anyone listening, I hope it reminds you that even when life feels uncertain, love, truth, and patience can lead to the most unexpected and beautiful reunions. If this story resonated with you, I hope you'll take a moment to like, share, and comment with your own experiences, because every voice matters. And sometimes sharing our stories is the first step to finding connection.